Hello, everyone. If you've clicked on this, you're probably thinking, my goodness, Bette Davis had an amazing career, and she did, but I still wished she had made a couple more films if she had lived. So, just a quick celebration of her. Like Eartha Kitt, she managed to stay relevant in every decade. So, obviously, her peak period was in the 30s, where she got her two Oscars, which, funnily enough, are probably not for her best performances, which, in my opinion, are. Okay, anyway, if you can hear that, grrr, to all those motorcycle gangs who live around here. Okay, so she should have got an Oscar for The Little Foxes. That smile, oh my goodness, it's one of the great performances ever. And, obviously, funnily enough, to get into the what if of it all, so Claudette Colbert, who won the Oscar that everybody thought that Bette Davis was going to win, but she couldn't really because she wasn't included in the nomination list, but then they could do a write-in vote, and Claudette had to be taken back from the train station. Even she didn't think she was going to win. Anyway, that performance is a great performance, and funnily enough, that role was supposed to go to Bette Davis. So what if she had done It Happened One Night? Now, you might think comedy, is that really Bette? But, she kind of made a living, in her later years, going around and giving talks and showing her film, and they were basically stand-up comedy routines. She would tell funny stories. It wasn't the laugh a minute type of comedy that we associate like a Phyllis Diller, but it's more of that storytelling, Kathy Griffin kind of style. So, hey, I think she could have done it. At the time she had that platinum blonde, Jean Harlow-esque look, and hey, I think she could have done very, very well in that role. Now, would she have wanted Claudette Colbert's career? I actually don't think so. So I'm going to say the right thing happened here. She got the right career. So anyway, so she, 30s. So her biggest role, her biggest box office was for Now Voyager. But then probably most remembered for things like, so in the 50s, you've got All About Eve. Then in the 60s, you've got Baby Jane. Then in the 70s, we've got a sort of a comeback with the Agatha Christie Death on the Nile. And then in the 80s, we have the Whales of August with the wonderful Lillian Gish, who, anyway, they seem to have a tussle with. Because, Lillian's performance, it's so natural. It's so funny that... Sorry, in a Bette Davis thing, I shouldn't be talking about Lillian, but let me talk about Lillian. She was the first movie star ever, and this was before there was any training in movie acting, and she didn't do the Bette Davis theatrical stage kind of acting. What she did was just very, very naturalistic, and she stole the show. She stole the show from Bette Davis. But Bette was great in Whales of August. It was great to see the two titans of cinema. Those motorcycle gangs really don't want me to do this, but I want to do it, damn it. So anyway, so her last film was Wicked Stepmother, which a little bird told me she had to bow out of because of dental surgery. So that's why she couldn't, the film ended up, they kind of had to piece it together. So, and then she went on this publicity campaign about how terrible it was. Well, the role she was trying to campaign to get, but she didn't live long enough to get, I think would have been the perfect way to cap her career, because like she's got the Oscar for, Jezebel, Southern Woman, should have had an Oscar for The Little Foxes. And should I talk about this? I guess I should. A little divergent, but she came very close to being Scarlett O'Hara, but she turned it down. Partly because it was this time of the fight with Warner's, where she was trying to get good roles and good parts, and it actually kind of, even though she lost the court case, it worked out in her favour. But she ended up saying, like, no, I don't want to work with Errol Flynn, and they ended up making, the two of them ended up making the Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, which is a great movie. And if you watch it, you can go, you know what? I don't know if I've said this on one of the videos before, but I actually think that Betty would have been great. No doubt. If you watch Jezebel, you can go, yep, she would have been a good Scarlett O'Hara. But the problem is that Jack Warner wanted the two of them, Davis and Errol Flynn, to star together. And I don't think Errol Flynn would have been a good Rhett Butler, and Betty thought so too. But I want to say that if I were there, I would have said, get Errol Flynn to play the man she loves. Because Rhett Butler, we all remember Rhett Butler, but actually Scarlett O'Hara was in love with this other fellow who was kind of a bit of a nothing. I reckon Errol Flynn could have been really good in that. And then maybe had she done It Happened One Night, it would have reteamed the two of them, like having Clark Gable and Bette Davis together again. So there you go. So It Happened One Night, Gone with the Wind. But anyway, so she's famous for playing Southern women. And so before I go back, did you know that prior to Baby Jane, Joan Crawford actually wanted Bette Davis to adapt Ethan Frome with her? Now, this film wouldn't actually get produced until the early 90s with Liam Neeson, but she wanted to do this back at the Warner era, so possibly early 40s, around the time when Joan Crawford was looking for the right project to make. Interestingly enough, it kind of mirrors Baby Jane, in that the wife is quite sickly, and then the cousin helper who comes in and starts the kind of affair with the husband, the titular Ethan Frome. She's very healthy, and so you sort of have that healthy person, sickly person dynamic that you have in Baby Jane. Now, I've asked Andrea Dean von Scoyoc to do a rendition of Chapter 4, an extract of Chapter 4, so we can maybe imagine Bette Davis and the great Joan Crawford playing together at their peak in the 40s.
Ethan Frome, Chapter 4, Extract. Read by Andrea Dean Van Scoy. As soon as his wife Zena had driven off, Ethan took his coat and cap from the peg. Maddie was washing up the dishes, humming one of the dance tunes of the night before. He said, "So long, Matt." And she answered gaily, "So long, Ethan." And that was all. It was warm and bright in the kitchen. The sun slanted through the south window on the girl's moving figure, on the cat dozing in a chair, and on the geraniums brought in from the doorway, where Ethan had planted them in the summer to make a garden for Maddie. He would have liked to linger on, watching her tidy up, and then settle down to her sewing. But he wanted still more to get the hauling done and be back at the farm before night. All the way down to the village, he continued to think of his return to Maddie. The kitchen was a poor place, not spruce and shining as his mother had kept it in his boyhood. But it was surprising what a home-like look the mere fact of Zena's absence gave it. And he pictured what it would be like that evening when he and Maddie were there after supper. For the first time, they would be alone together indoors. And they would sit there, one on each side of the stove like a married couple. He in his stocking feet and smoking his pipe. She laughing and talking in that funny way she had, which was always as new to him as if he had never heard her before. The sweetness of the picture and the relief of knowing that his fears of trouble with Zena were unfounded sent up his spirits with a rush, and he, who was usually so silent, whistled and sang aloud as he drove through the snowy fields. There was in him a slumbering spark of sociability, which the long Starkfield winters had not yet extinguished. By nature, grave and inarticulate, he admired recklessness and gaiety in others, and was warmed to the marrow by friendly human intercourse. At Worcester, though he had the name of keeping to himself and not being much of a hand at a good time, he had secretly glorified in being clapped on the back and hailed as Old F or Old Stiff. And the cessation of such familiarities had increased the chill of his return to Starkfield. There, the silence had deepened about him year by year. Left alone, after his father's accident to carry the burden of farm and mill, he had had no time for convivial loiterings in the village. And when his mother fell ill, the loneliness of the house grew more oppressive than that of the fields. His mother had been a talker in her day, but after her trouble, the sound of her voice was seldom heard, though she had not lost the power of speech. Sometimes, in the long winter evenings, when in desperation her son asked her why she didn't say something, she would lift a finger and answer, "Because I'm listening." And on stormy nights, when the loud wind was about the house, she would complain if he spoke to her. "They're talking so out there that I can't hear you." It was only when she drew toward her last illness, and his cousin, Zenobia Pierce, came over from the next valley to help him nurse her, that human speech was heard again in the house. After the mortal silence of his long imprisonment, Zena's volubility was music to his ears. He felt that he might have gone like his mother if the sound of a new voice had not come to steady him. Zena seemed to understand his case at a glance. She laughed at him for not knowing the simplest sickbed duties, and told him to go right along out and leave her to see to things. The mere fact of obeying her orders, of feeling free to go about his business again and talk with other men, restored his shaken balance and magnified his sense of what he owed her. Her efficiency shamed and dazzled him. She seemed to possess by instinct all the household wisdom that his long apprenticeship had not instilled in him. When the end came, it was she who had to tell him to hitch up and go for the undertaker. And she thought it funny that he had not settled beforehand who was to have his mother's clothes and sewing machine. After the funeral, when he saw her preparing to go away, he was seized with an unreasoning dread of being left alone on the farm. And before he knew what he was doing, he had asked her to stay there with him. He had often thought since that it would not have happened if his mother had died in spring instead of winter. When they married, it was agreed that, as soon as he could straighten out the difficulties resulting from Mrs. Frome's long illness, they would sell the farm and sawmill and try their luck in a large town. Ethan's love of nature did not take the form of a taste for agriculture. He had always wanted to be an engineer and to live in towns where there were lectures and big libraries and fellows doing things. A slight engineering job in Florida put in his way during his period of study at Worcester increased his faith in his ability, as well as his eagerness to see the world. And he felt sure that, with a smart wife like Zena, it would not be long before he had made himself a place in it.
What did you think about that? I think this could have been a great project for them. And interestingly, a lot of the sort of hag horror films were sort of horror remakes of earlier films, like Dead Ringers was like a remake of A Stolen Life. This would have sort of kind of continued in that tradition, where maybe now Baby Jane is a remake of the earlier Ethan Frome. I think it could have been a good project. I actually think Joan Crawford was a very smart woman who knew what an audience wanted from her, and I think she knew that her and Bette Davis would have been great together, and she was right. Pity Betty never made it. So, what if? I think what if Betty hadn't made it, maybe Warner's wouldn't have sacked her, because I think this would have been a big hit and she would have been able to ride that wave that Joan had in the 40s. Whereas, unfortunately, Betty, even though she had her biggest hit with Now Voyager in the early 40s, sort of towards the later 40s, she kind of had, the peak had kind of passed. Anyway, it's an interesting thing. Okay, now this is all about movies, but an interesting thing to note as well is that Betty made a huge push into television in the 50s. Even though I just said that her career kind of died out in the end of the 40s, she made a really big... Her career kind of had a lull in the 50s, even though she was always working. So in the 50s, she made quite a lot of television pilots. And so in my little playlist of forgotten films by Golden Age stars, I've popped a number of them in there. And so if you haven't watched them, I recommend watching them. The two I'm going to mention is the Star Maker and the Dressmaker. So, sorry, not the Dressmaker, the Decorator. So the Decorator, I think, came first, and it's marvelous. It's her and Mary Wicks, who you might remember from White Christmas, and they're wonderful together. So she's the decorator's assistant, and Betty's obviously the decorator. You know, very grande dame, very Betty Tallulah type of role. Like it does feel like my little thing of like, if this had gone to series, I feel like eventually at some point Tallulah Bankhead would have come in as a rival decorator in like a series of guest stars, or like a Paul Lynde, or someone like that. And maybe she would have had Thelma Ritter as her assistant, and you could have seen the two of them battle it out. And maybe Joan Crawford. It's such a pity, because it's marvelous, and it was so heartwarming, and I really wish the Decorator had gotten made. It's a real hidden gem, and the Star Maker is actually even better. So Betty plays a Broadway talent agent, and so one of her big clients is the father of her new, very jittery client, and you see her sort of guiding this young actor through his first kind of bad performance on Broadway, and it's just it's so perfect. Gary Merrill is there as to play the husband. Obviously, he was the husband in real life. It was tailor made for Bette Davis. She gets to be heartwarming, but she also gets to be that same Margot Channing role that everybody wants to see. Again, I have no idea why it didn't get made. I guess perhaps for the same reason they didn't believe in Baby Jane initially. If I can pop it in there, these two old broads, I wouldn't give you a dime. Like, they probably just, I don't know. Interesting thing about this, going back to the Dressmaker, is that it was produced by Aaron Spelling, like one of his early jobs as producer. And so that would come around back again in the early 80s, where he created, one of his big budget nighttime soaps, this time set in a hotel called Hotel, and starring Josh Brolin, I think. And Betty was hired. She was going to be the owner of the hotel, and she was only in one episode, and she had to bow out due to illness. Once she recovered, she thought the scripts weren't up to par, so she passed on it. I think it went for 5 seasons. It's a bit forgotten now, but I think this would have been her kind of comeback in the same way Joan Collins got with Dynasty, I think. Funnily enough, the person who replaced her, and probably at Betty's suggestion, is Eve Harrington herself, Anne Baxter. So Anne Baxter finally got to replace Betty, due to an illness. Like, it's perfect. And Anne did the whole 5 seasons. So look at that. Like, isn't that kind of funny, the way life works? I mean, Anne Baxter also, after Lauren Bacall bowed out of Applause, which was the musical based on All About Eve, the person who replaced her was Anne Baxter, and Anne Baxter got to be Margot Channing. So, I mean, that's one of those funny things where, like, in real life, like in the movie, Celeste Holm and Bette Davis were best friends, but in real life they despised each other. And whereas like on screen, Anne Baxter and Bette Davis are despite, kind of, they have that intense rivalry, but in fact they actually respected each other. Betty really, she supported her, like she went to her performance to see her as Margot Channing, and obviously she put this role for her as well. So don't believe what you see on TV. So the big what if, the thing is, I'm going to say, like, Betty might have been lucky that these TV series didn't go to series, because like Caroline Jones with Addams Family, or like Loretta Young, like countless of other film stars who've gone to television. You don't think it now, because now a lot of stars kind of move between television and film now. But at the time, it was a bit of a no-no. Like, once you do television, you don't go back to film. So I kind of think that perhaps had there been, like, say, 3 seasons of The Dressmaker or 3 seasons of The Star Maker, I keep calling it The Dressmaker, The Decorator or Star Maker, I kind of think, maybe she would have been locked into television from there on. Or, I don't know, maybe, like, her legendary status could have brought her back into television, such as, say, in Baby Jane. So who knows? It's a big what if. I kind of wonder if she would have ever done television again. Sorry, if she would have ever done film again, if these television series had gone to series, become big hits, and gone into syndication. Because quite often people can't be, with television, people became so associated with that one role. But then, I mean, Rock Hudson survived being on a popular television show, so who knows? I go back. Let me talk about what I think would have been the perfect way to cap off her career. And I'm sorry, Jessica Tandy, I know these were the films that made you really, really famous, but she was actively campaigning for the part in... Okay, so not Fried Green Tomatoes, but I wanted to do Fried Green Tomatoes. It's the Australian director Fred Schepisi. It's got a very difficult name. Driving Miss Daisy with Morgan Freeman. Bette Davis would have been perfect. She would have knocked it out of the park. Now, obviously, Jessica Tandy did a brilliant performance, not taking that away from her. But just in terms of, like, capping off this great career, because if she had stopped with Whales of August, like Lillian Gish did, that would have been a really nice way to cap off her career. But making a bit of a dud, because I mean the idea, she was like, well, I've never done sci-fi, I want to make something that my kids can watch, but it didn't quite work out. Anyway, so as I said, I think she would have been, had she lived, I think she would have been brilliant in Driving Miss Daisy, and it might have got her that 3rd Oscar. But anyway, Jessica Tandy did a great job, and if she had done Fried Green Tomatoes, sorry, if she had done Driving Miss Daisy, I think she would have been great for Fried Green Tomatoes. But anyway, it wasn't to be. But I think that could have been a nice way to sort of start and end her career with these Southern women. Now, another role that she actively campaigned for was the Elizabeth Taylor role in Mike Nichols. Is that right? Is it Mike Nichols? I get these things wrong sometimes. But anyway, the one she did with Richard Burton, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Betty campaigned for that role. Now, it ended up going to because she was coming off of Baby Jane, so like there was a bit of like maybe she could do an A picture, but anyway, she ended up going back to these sort of hag horror films, but everybody loves them. That's why she's kind of remembered as Baby Jane and her feud with Joan Crawford. But in any case, she wanted that role, which would have been very meta, because there is that part where they quote, and that's essentially, as Betty says, when people do Bette Davis, they're not really doing Betty, they're doing Elizabeth Taylor doing Bette Davis. And then, as Betty says, she now imitates the imitators. Well, she did in her act, because she used to, go to the auditorium or wherever she was performing, and she would look around, look here, look there, and just go take a cigarette and go, "What a dump!" It would always get her a big laugh. So, Anyway, that's a gift from Elizabeth Taylor to her. So the thing is, I don't really think she had a great career. Obviously, she didn't have like that super duper, like always doing high quality projects like Katharine Hepburn. Like she had, peaks and valleys, but we kind of love her more, all the more for it. Anyway, I think she would be great for that. I want to say, the thing is, Katharine Hepburn looks like Jane Fonda. But I'm such a sentimentalist, right? You got Jezebel with a young Henry Fonda and a young Bette Davis. I would have really liked to see them together again on Golden Pond. That would have been interesting. But it's not meant to be, because really, when you look at Jane Fonda, she really does look like Katharine Hepburn could be her mother, and Henry Fonda obviously is her father. But, anyway, I feel like I'm taking away moments from other actresses, like would Betty have wanted this career? Like, would she want to take away from Jessica Tandy's big moment? And would she want to take away from, probably Elizabeth Taylor's greatest acting performance? Would she want to have, taken away the crowning glory, the jewel in the crown of Claudette Colbert's career? So, I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. What do you think? What kind of films could Bette Davis have made had she lived? I don't think she would have lived that much longer. But it's an interesting thing to think about. Who else would you like me to cover? Let me know, and thank you everyone for subscribing. Mwah. Please enjoy more of my videos if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.